New York City, center of world commerce, buildings scraping the sky, mecca for arts and entertainment. This city was built by the hands and dreams and determination of diverse peoples from Asia, Africa, Europe, Latin America, from all over the world. Long, long ago, before the ancestors of these people immigrated here, this area was the home of Algonquian-speaking peoples, the Lenape and Canarsie tribes. For thousands of years, they had hunted in the southernmost part of the island they called Manhattan, or island surrounded by hills. In September 1609, Henry Hudson, an Englishman sailing for the Dutch East India Company, was on a mission to find a new water route to Asia. He found instead an island with a natural harbor and rich soil.
The finest for cultivation that I ever in my life set foot upon, and it also abounds in trees of every description, with all kinds of timbers suitable for shipbuilding and making large casks. It is as pleasant a land as one can tread upon.
Based on Hudson's report, the Dutch West India Company was formed to pursue the beaver fur trade in North America. 15 years later, in 1624, 30 Dutch families arrived to begin building the settlement they would call New Amsterdam. Their arrival was not entirely welcomed by the nomadic tribes that used this area. Tensions developed and the Dutch settled at the southern tip of Manhattan. After the settlers paid the Native Americans 60 guilders worth of metal kettles, axes, bolts of cloth, and other goods, a deal was struck for use of the island. In the same year, 1626, African slaves were brought to construct the settlement's fort and buildings and to pave Broad Street, the first cobblestone street in North America. The slaves provided labor for rapid growth, and slavery proved a lucrative business, continuing in New York for another 200 years. Because the Dutch encouraged trade and fostered religious tolerance, New Amsterdam soon attracted a population of many languages and cultures. Despite New Amsterdam's growth, the Dutch West India Company questioned the worth of maintaining its young colony. Within 25 years, the fur trade was no longer profitable, and the colony struggled with little support from Holland until 1664. That year, the English King Charles II, quick to seize an opportunity, ordered its capture. When the invading fleet of 4 British warships sailed into the harbor, peg-legged Governor Peter Stuyvesant made preparations to defend New Amsterdam. But the town's most important citizens signed a petition asking Stuyvesant to surrender. He had little choice but to comply, and the colony passed into British control. King Charles II gave his brother, the Duke of York, the entire colony. The town now had a population of 700, and in addition to their homes, boasted of 1 gallows, 1 fort, 1 hotel, 1 windmill, and 35 beer taverns. In honor of the Duke, the town was renamed New York. Under the English, New York quickly became an important Atlantic port. By 1700, the population had risen to more than 4,400 people. It was becoming a center for shipbuilding and crafts. With continued growth, the city could support institutions of higher education, such as King's College, founded in 1754, known today as Columbia University. But King George III inspired little loyalty from his American subjects. He was accused of exploiting the colonies and strangling their economies. In 1776, New York joined with the other colonies to declare their independence from the English crown. Thomas Paine, revolutionary patriot and writer, encouraged the rebels.
A government of our own is our natural right. It is infinitely wiser and safer to form a constitution of our own. You can never reconcile Britain and America. The last cord is now broken.
British warships once again threatened the city. And after the success of the Redcoats in the Battle of Harlem Heights, New York became a prisoner of war and a loyalist stronghold for the next 7 years. Not until the end of the war in 1783 did the American Army, led by General George Washington, re-enter the city. The final saga of the Revolutionary War took place at Fraunces Tavern, where General Washington said farewell to his officers.
With a heart full of love and gratitude, I now take leave of you. I most devoutly wish that your latter days may be as prosperous and happy as your former ones have been glorious and honorable.
Serving as the nation's capital, New York hosted the inauguration of Washington as the first president of the United States. Although New York's term as the federal capital was short, 1 year, its importance as an economic center continued to grow. In 1792, influential New York merchants drew up an agreement that served as the framework for the founding of the New York Stock Exchange. In 1799, even though the federal government continued to sanction the slave trade, New Yorkers passed the nation's first emancipation law, gradually ending slavery in the city within 30 years. The freed slaves entered the labor force and continued farming in outlying districts. The city's social geography also changed. Great numbers of laborers were needed to build the city and work its industries. Workers from Europe were encouraged to immigrate. For the first time, a distinct separation between business and residential areas occurred as wealthier citizens moved uptown, leaving the lower regions of the island to the workers' quarters and the industrial and shipping sectors. The banking and securities trade remained around Wall Street at the southernmost tip of the island. In 1811, a plan to organize the growth of the city above 14th Street set out a grid of numbered streets and avenues. To make building easier, bluffs were leveled off and swamps filled in. Another physical change that stimulated growth was the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825. Agricultural products and raw materials from the Great Lakes could now be readily transported to the Atlantic Ocean through the port of New York. New York, gateway to North America, welcomed large numbers of German immigrants in the 1820s and 40s. Many were skilled craftsmen, and they helped to make New York a center for fine furniture manufacturing. The largest Irish migration occurred after the potato famines of the 1840s. Within 15 years, more than 200,000 Irish had settled in the city. Despite their numbers, the Irish faced severe discrimination, and most were relegated to work as laborers and domestic servants. Immigrants often lived in abject poverty, in tenement houses without proper sanitation facilities or clean water. There were frequent epidemics, cholera, typhoid, smallpox, some of them brought by foreign ships entering the port.
A bark arrived with the yellow fever on board from Havana, where it is very sickly. She was sent home, but the captain was suffered to come on shore. Elizabeth Bleecker from her diary.
In response to these conditions, the Croton Aqueduct was built in 1842, providing Manhattan with pure and wholesome water. By the middle of the 19th century, a sewer system had been added to city services, enabling wealthy citizens to have indoor plumbing. Gas lights and central heating were soon to follow. In 1858, Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux designed a 600-acre oasis in the center of Manhattan. The appropriately named Central Park took the place of swampland and squatters' shacks. As the Civil War began, New York's economy shifted from the financing of Southern cotton to the financing of the Union Army. Although New Yorkers maintained strongly divided sympathies, the city aided the Union cause by sending troops. But working class and poor New Yorkers protested a military draft that permitted wealthy men to buy their way out of the Army. In July 1863, blaming blacks for the combined ills of war and low wages, white mobs exploded in anger, attacking black New Yorkers in a 5-day draft riot in which hundreds of people lost their lives. Following the Civil War, a new class of wealthy New Yorkers emerged. This Gilded Age was an era of great monopolies. Commodore Vanderbilt founded his shipping and railroad empire. John Jacob Astor amassed enormous real estate holdings. Excessive wealth encouraged widespread political corruption, plunging local government into debt. Political hacks skimmed millions of dollars through patronage and inefficiency. The greed of boss William Marcy Tweed, head of the Tammany Hall Political Club, was notorious. Boss Tweed was eventually imprisoned, but corruption from the Tammany Tiger continued well into the next century. The excesses of the Gilded Age did have cultural benefits. Wealthy American industrialists, influenced by European taste, founded the city's first great cultural institutions, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Carnegie Hall, and the Metropolitan Opera, which opened its first season with Gounod's Faust. That same year, 1883, saw the construction of what was considered one of the structural wonders of the age. A suspension bridge designed by John Roebling linked Manhattan to the third largest city in the country. It was named the Brooklyn Bridge. Another of Brooklyn's proudest attractions became more accessible with the completion of the bridge. On a hot summer day, 500,000 people would crowd Coney Island beaches. As a British traveler reported in the London Times,
They spread over the 4 miles of sand strip with bands of music in full blast. Countless vehicles moving, all the theaters, merry-go-rounds, fortune-telling shops open, and everywhere a dense but good-humored crowd, sightseeing, drinking beer, and swallowing clam chowder.
Manhattan's population rose to nearly 1.5 million in the late 1880s. Miles of telephone and telegraph lines nearly obscured the sky. Those wires fell under the weight of 22 inches of snow in the disastrous blizzard of 1888. An estimated 200 lives were lost, and it took days for the city to dig out from under the drifts and the tangle of broken telegraph poles and wires. The city stepped up its plan to bury the wires underground. Manhattan continued to grow, and every year the numbers of immigrants increased. Fleeing persecution in the western United States in the 1880s, large numbers of Chinese arrived. They settled in the downtown neighborhood of Mott and Pell Streets, soon known as Chinatown. Barred by discrimination from entering many areas of commerce, they carved out a niche for themselves in the laundry, restaurant, and garment industries. Shopkeeper Lung Chin recalls his family's life in Chinatown.
We were normally up at 5 o'clock in the morning. In those days, everyone worked 18 hours. 'Cause you sleep there, you eat there, you work there all your life, and the only days you get off are 3 days in Chinese New Year.
Southern Europeans also began to arrive in great numbers. The neighborhood of Little Italy sprang up south of Greenwich Village and next to Chinatown. Italians also faced job and housing discrimination, but the men found work in the building trades or by establishing family groceries, while women and children did piecework in their tenement homes. Beginning in 1886, immigrants were greeted by a wondrous statue, their torch raised high above the bustling New York harbor, a symbol of hope to all those seeking freedom and opportunity. The imposing figure was the Statue of Liberty, designed by Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, a gift to the United States from the people of France. A young Jewish girl, Elizabeth Friedman, immigrated with her family from Tsarist Russia through the new immigration depot at Ellis Island.
When we got closer to Ellis Island, we saw the Statue of Liberty, and we were so excited. We hugged each other and cried. Mother couldn't imagine we had made it.
Jews from Eastern Europe seeking religious and political freedom began settling on the Lower East Side. They became merchants, they entered the garment industry, and they were influential in the growing labor movement. On January 1st, 1898, by an act of the New York State Legislature, 4 boroughs, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island, were incorporated with Manhattan into the city of New York. This legislation doubled the city's population to almost 3.5 million people and quadrupled the area within the city limits. The need for a faster, more efficient transportation system was apparent. Congested streets prompted the development of the first elevated train system, known affectionately as the L. In 1904, the first line of New York's subway system began operation. It took just 26 minutes to ride the 9 miles from City Hall to 145th Street. The early years of the 20th century were a time of militant protest. The suffrage movement came to national attention, with marches on Fifth Avenue demanding the vote for women. Workers demonstrated in Union Square for better working conditions. Extremes of wealth and poverty characterized the burgeoning city, but pressure from the socialist and labor movements forced legislation to improve working conditions, curtail child labor, create mandatory primary education, and tear down the worst slums.
A dozen years ago, I gave a stockbroker a blowing up for hammering his cellar door full of nails to prevent children using it like a slide. It was all the playground they had. Jacob Reese, slum reformer, and photographer.
The Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire in 1911, in which 146 workers died, galvanized national public opinion against sweatshop management, and within 3 years, job safety laws were passed in New York to protect industrial workers. These laws inspired reforms in many other cities. As the country readied for war in Europe, men were again drafted for military service. Workers cranked the wheels of industry day and night to turn out weapons, ships, tanks. The increased production meant more jobs and a thriving stock market. Large numbers of African Americans, escaping segregation in the South, began to settle on the west side of Manhattan in an area called San Juan Hill. A recession in 1907, combined with overbuilding, opened up Harlem to the new arrivals. Churches, schools, and families made up a new Harlem that by the 1920s had become the cultural capital of Black America.
In Harlem, we were seen in a beautiful light. We were heralds of a new day. We were the firstborn of the Dark Renaissance. Anna Bontemps, writer and poet.
Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, W.E.B. Du Bois, Augusta Savage, and other African-American talent in literature and the arts flourished. Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, and other black musicians struck new notes from the blues, gospel, and pop tunes of the day to celebrate a swinging chroma of sound called jazz. With the introduction of electricity, New York had become a city of nightlife. And nowhere was the nightlife more exciting or the bright lights more dazzling than on Broadway. New York nurtured the greatest musical and theatrical talents of the century, such as Brooklyn-raised opera star Enrico Caruso, the musical team of George and Ira Gershwin, the trailblazing group theater company, actor Paul Robeson, and singing, dancing stage stars Adele and Fred Astaire. But the roar of the 20s became a whimper in October 1929 when the stock market crashed, forcing the wholesale closing of banks and ushering in the Great Depression. The city's population reached nearly 7 million by 1930, with a glaring disparity between rich and poor. Thousands lined up at free soup kitchens, apple sellers became a symbol of hard times, and shanty towns sprang up in Central Park and elsewhere. Reform legislation during the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt paralleled Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia's campaign against Tammany-style corruption. Amidst the Depression, the Empire State Building, a symbol of modern urbanism, arose at 5th Avenue and 34th Street. Some of the construction workers were Native Americans, Mohawks known for their skill working at great heights. Completed in 1931, the building held the title of the world's tallest building for more than 40 years. Because it took half that time for it to be fully rented, it was jokingly referred to as the Empty State Building. Another Depression-era symbol of the world of tomorrow arose from an ash dump in Queens, the 1939 World's Fair. The largest and most visionary fair ever built, it looked to a future in which man's problems would be solved by urban planning and technology. As Talbot F. Hamlin, noted architect and critic, observed,
New York is the essence of America, commercial-minded, creator of arrogant dreams, always ready to give a show, and above all, dynamic.
But prospects for the future were shattered by the outbreak of World War II. U.S. entry into the war lifted the country out of the Depression. As in past wars, the New York area was a port of embarkation for goods and people. Even before war broke out, New York had become a shelter for European dissidents and intellectuals like Kurt Weill, Marlene Dietrich, Louis Buñuel, Marcel Duchamp, and Max Ernst. Other refugees continued to arrive, fleeing the shifting borders and tyrannical governments of Central Europe. Puerto Ricans, who had been migrating to New York since 1901, began arriving in large numbers after World War II. They followed earlier Latino newcomers to El Barrio, the neighborhood of East Harlem, and to the South Bronx. By the 1950s, with the center of world commerce entrenched in Lower Manhattan and the construction of the United Nations complex on the East River, New York became the unofficial capital of the world. After a change in U.S. immigration law in the 1960s, new groups of immigrants arrived from all points of the globe. By the time the city hosted the 1964 World's Fair in Flushing Meadow, every nation exhibiting at the fair was also represented by a sizable community of New York residents. New York has been at the vanguard of social change in the United States. As activism in the 1950s and 60s gained momentum, New Yorkers were in the forefront of the fight for national civil rights. Leaders such as Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. rallied national support through the New York-based news media. Widespread social protest reached a peak in the summer of 1969 with the resurgence of the women's movement, anti-war protests, and militant resistance by the gay and lesbian community against persistent police harassment in the Greenwich Village neighborhood around Christopher Street. The protests at the Stonewall Inn gave birth to the gay rights movement. Throughout its history, New York City has constantly renewed itself. In a controversial urban renewal plan in the mid-1960s, the former San Juan Hill neighborhood was leveled to make way for Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, providing a new home for the Metropolitan Opera and the New York City Ballet. Dilapidated warehouses in Lower Manhattan gave way to the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, an impressive 110 floors housing international business and finance. As the appearance of the city continues to evolve, so does the ethnic diversity of its population. 6 in 10 New Yorkers list their country of origin as somewhere outside the United States. New York's continued vitality is due in large measure to its ability to absorb newcomers, offering them opportunities and taking advantage of their skills and ideas. The history and enduring quality and strength of New York is seen in the faces of its people. New York City is a community unlike any other the world has ever known.